Now, before the actual New Testament stuff, an overview of Marcion and early Christianity. This, being fair, I compiled largely from detractors. So a lot of this will be negative, and there will be some contradiction, and that is intentional, and we can talk about it if anybody wants to. So was Marcion like Lee Strobel unopposed? Kind of. Just evaluating the Gospels. Kind of. Save that. Remember that, because we're going to go super deep into all that. But first, I want to be fair. So here's some of just things about Marcion, things about the compilation, all that stuff, but largely from sources that did not like him. One of the biggest things was dualism, which is similar to Gnosticism. We talked about that last week. But dualism and the rejection of the Old Testament. Marcion taught that the God of the Old Testament, whom he is reported to have called the Demiurge, there is argument about this, whether the term was used or not, because this is largely tied to Gnosticism, was a distinct, inferior, and wrathful deity who focused on law, justice, and judgment. Also, he contrasted this deity, Yahweh, with God in his perspective, who is Jesus of the New Testament, who he believed was a higher, benevolent God of love, grace, mercy, that then is revealed through Jesus Christ. So I'll save that. But that's it. Yahweh, bad. Jesus, good. Yahweh, evil, in a sense, from his perspective. Jesus is pure. Grace, love, mercy, compassion, benevolence. Creation of his own canon, which we're going to go in massive depth on. But these are some of the things like you'll get if you Google things. You'll find these. Marcion rejected the Hebrew scriptures. We talked about that entirely, completely. He then compiles what he considers to be the true Christian canon, consisting of, and what is arguably the first Christian canon, which consists of 10 of Paul's epistles. He does not include the pastoral epistles, and we'll talk about that in a minute too, and a heavily edited version of Gospel of Luke, with this is what you'll be told, is that it's stripped of the Jewish elements. The argument to that, from the other side, is that the truth seems to be that Luke and the other Gospels took from Marcion. So rather than, like you got here, he heavily edited the Gospel of Luke, taking out Jewish elements. What seems to be the truth is the opposite. It seems to be that Marcion had this text, or these texts, and they were taken from him. He was used as a source, not the other way around. Meaning, and I mentioned it earlier, that it seems some of the Gospels injected Jewish elements. Marcion didn't remove them. They were added later. Obviously, a lot of argument about it. Emphasis on Paul. This is important, and this is super true. Marcion viewed the Apostle Paul as the only true interpreter of Jesus' teachings and gospel. Remembering, and I'm sorry if it's annoying, but remembering there is no New Testament. There is no Bible. You have the Septuagint for Greek people here, people who speak Greek. You have the Septuagint, and then you have some obscure, impossible to nail down and understand, some writings being passed around. Very flippantly. Nothing official. Nothing clear. Nothing confident. You primarily have these stories being told. The only thing besides that you have, and it's why Marcion probably put so much emphasis on it, is you have Paul's epistles. You have 10 epistles, and then you have the pastoral epistles, which honestly today still a large portion of scholarship rejects and say it was not Paul. They're either forgeries, they might have been somebody who knew Paul, but they're absolutely not written by Paul. As well as a couple others. Scholarship today, like the consensus from what I understand, is that 7 of Paul's epistles are seen as absolutely written by Paul. 7. Meaning 3, no. And pastoral epistles, no. Which is important to understand. And if you really read, truly read, you can feel it. We've talked about it a bit, going through some of the New Testament stuff earlier this year, or last year, I guess. But Marcion loved Paul. And probably because he had the text, he had these epistles, he had this data to go off of, and Paul did not teach largely Jewish stuff. Paul was very much about like, this is the new covenant. Why are you guys still doing that stuff? We don't do that anymore. We are not under the law. Jesus fulfilled the law. You're defeating the purpose of what Jesus did. Paul was all about that heavily with these early Christian churches. So it makes sense why Marcion like gravitated towards that, because that's what Marcion saw as the truth as well, is that we are not that. Marcion took it a bit further. Paul would quote the Old Testament. Paul was not a scholar, but he was super educated in the Old Testament, very educated for that time. So Marcion differed from Paul in that way. But Paul was very anti, let's drag Jewish tradition into the Christian church. And so Marcion gravitated towards him probably because of that. All right, moving on. Emphasis on Paul, super important. The view of Jesus. Marcion taught that Jesus was not born of a woman and did not possess a physical body, aligning with a docetic view of Christ. He believed Jesus appeared in a spiritual form and was sent by the higher God to free humanity from the tyranny of the Old Testament deity. This is heavily disagreed upon, which is why I included it. I don't know any of the scholars that I very deeply and obsessively follow who would ever express this way. So I don't know where this comes from. Probably one of the early theologians, but just understand that's not widely accepted. From what I know, it's not widely accepted. Condemnation by the church. Marcion's teachings were condemned as heretical by the Proto-Orthodox Church, including figures such as Irenaeus, Tertullian, and Hippolytus. His rejection of the Old Testament and his theological dualism were particularly controversial, which is fair enough. I hope that clip was informational. If it wasn't, I hope it was at least kind of amusing or entertaining in some fashion. Either way, if you want to watch the full live stream, you can click right here. We do a number of these live streams every week on 2 different YouTube channels, at Tattooed Theist and at Live Bible Study. If you click the link to our Discord server in the description below, there's an events page there that shows you where and when all the live streams are. You'll also then be a part, whether you like it or not, of our dysfunctionally beautiful Discord family.